Today's show is sponsored by JumpCloud, introducing the JumpCloud Directory Platform, the directory reimagined for the modern world. JumpCloud changes the way IT administrators manage their organizations by providing a comprehensive and flexible cloud directory platform. From one pane of glass, manage user identities and resource access, secure Mac, Windows, and Linux devices, and get a full view of your environment. Try JumpCloud for free today at jumpcloud.com and help your organization move to a modern, secure hybrid work model.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it is January, and we are rolling into 2022 and getting started with our shows. And if you're following along and have followed along in January's past, we are doing our look ahead shows this month. And admittedly, I'm going to cover a few items in Cloud News of the Week, but Cloud News of the Week is a bit slow. But with that, we'll have a short Cloud News of the Week and we'll jump into our look ahead segment. So for our first Cloud News of the Week, a really good article over at Kleiner Perkins, and link of course is in the show notes, but really talking about computing and data infrastructure in 2022, and a series of themes and some really good, it's a short article, but really good insights in there. I encourage everyone to go take a look at this one. A few items that caught my attention in there was a little bit of the state of serverless infrastructure and solutions, because of course we've seen serverless infrastructure and solutions continue to grow, and the concept has continued to grow over the years. But now we have companies out there like Netlify and Snowflake and PlanetScale, to name just a few. They're starting to really, and especially with Snowflake, really take off. But then what's also mentioned in the article is this shift they are starting to see, and I thought this was interesting as well, a little bit of crystal ball look into the future. What is the opportunity cost of the solutions providers and the cloud providers competing with each other over time? Is there potentially a new model that could come out of this? And with that, the model they are proposing actually is solutions providers like a Netlify or a Snowflake build on top of the big platforms, and everyone wins. The win at the cloud solutions layer, that public cloud layer, is they don't have to do all of the R&D and build all of those services. And they can just then focus on the economics and the value at the lower layers, if you will. Because up until now, the public clouds really have tried to be everything to everyone, and the amount of services just keeps growing. And at some point, something is going to have to shift. So this is one possible way that it could shift. Some other topics that were in there, some AI trends were mentioned I thought were a good read. And then the idea of operational analytics was the next one I thought worth mentioning. And first of all, what is operational analytics? Think of this is kind of like BI or business intelligence, but this is really the ability to, in real time, get operational layer statistics. And it's really been seen more of a luxury right now. And what happens if we dig deeper into that layer? And they do mention like Kafka and some of these other systems that have been out there. They are there, but they tend to be pretty low level and difficult at times as well. So what if this operational analytics layer was built out in the future? And the last trend I'll mention on this one is decentralized software, or Web3, as we're hearing it called more and more. And we'll probably do a look ahead show on this as well. But I really like the way they talked about it. I'm not going to go into the details here, but the way in which they present what is Web3 in just a one paragraph, how to digest it, how to think about it, and where to go in the future. How can that, as an investor, as they're writing this article, how does that form their thinking of where to go look for opportunities in the market? Moving on to our next cloud news of the week is a really good article by the Google Cloud team, and Forrest over at Google had a really good article put together about the idea of a multi-cloud engineer. Right up until now, and we've said it on the show as well in the past, pick one public cloud provider and really hone in and make sure you get that. But if I kind of go back to my computer science days, once you learn one skill very in depth, a lot of those knowledge and the skills and the concepts are transferable. And they reach into this and kind of take that one step further and brought up HashiCorp's recent survey where the world is going multi-cloud and a lot of customers are going multi-cloud, but at the same time, there's a big lack of skills in multi-cloud. So this concept of multi-cloud fluency, how can you go about it? How can you think about it? How can you take proficiency in one cloud, not even necessarily Google Cloud, but how can you take proficiency in one cloud and then apply it and do almost like that T-shaped kind of skill set where you go broad on a bunch and then really deep on one? A really good article, well put together, well thought out, definitely worth a read. And then it does list some resources in there as well as some folks to go follow. And of course, it included some of the Google Cloud voices that are out there, like good friend of the show and past show guest Richard Schroeder as well. And with that, again, short news this week, but I'm going to wrap it up and we're going to dive right into our look ahead show. This week, right after the break, we're going to be talking to Shawn Wang and do a look ahead into developer careers.
Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and distributed request traces from your cloud containers and orchestration software. Track the health and performance of your dynamic containers, apps, and services with rich visualizations and machine learning-driven alerts. Datadog's Cluster Agent streamlines data collection from large container clusters and allows you to auto-scale Kubernetes workloads based on any metric you're already collecting with Datadog. To start monitoring your container clusters today, sign up for a free trial, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, we're gonna use these first few shows, especially here in January, to really dive into kind of looking ahead at what the next year is going to look like. And it gives us a chance to kind of dive into some topics at a big broad level, maybe a little broader than we do on a week-to-week interview show. Aaron, the developer space is really broad. Oftentimes it's hard for us to kind of wrap our head around it. When you think about this space, what's interesting to developers, what's new for developers, like what are some of the big things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, the single biggest thing is just this explosion of DevRel just as both a career progression, as well as supply and demand, right? Like if you look back at some of the cloud news of the week, right, some of the surveys that we've highlighted in cloud news of the week, just the ability to fill the roles and the explosion of this is, I think, so fascinating. And that's why we brought our guest on today.
Yeah. So very, very excited. When one of the challenging things around the developer space is, like I mentioned, it's so broad. And so, going off and saying, like, who can we talk to really help us get perspective sometimes is challenging. But this week we're very, very lucky. Shawn Wang, who is head of developer experience at Temporal, but also we're going to dive into a lot of the other things he does to work with a ton of developers. Shawn, really excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the Cloudcast.
Really excited to be on. I have been listening for a while, and so was very honored to be invited.
Yeah, I got to know you probably about a year ago, and maybe not so much face to face, but you made a few comments about some of the shows we had done, and I was like, okay, who is that guy? Started digging through your Twitter feed, lots of interesting stuff, and then I started looking at kind of all the things that you do with communities, with the books, with all the different places you've worked, and I was like, I got to get him on the show at some point because he touches so many things that are interesting to developers, careers and languages and frameworks and all kinds of stuff. For anybody who doesn't know you or hasn't sort of seen the work you've done, give us a little bit of your background. Where have you been? What do you work on? What really keeps you interested?
Yeah, sure. It's funny because I don't do that consciously. I just kind of follow my interests, and it happens to line up with other people's interests. So I'm Shawn. I originally am from Singapore, and I moved to the US for a totally different career. I studied finance, and then went and started a whole career in finance in investment banking and hedge funds, but then changed careers to tech at the age of 30. We can have a whole conversation about that one. Sure. And moved mostly from the front end to the back end. So I did front end at Two Sigma, and then I did serverless and a bit of Jamstack stuff at Netlify. And then I moved to AWS, where I got more involved in API Gateway and AppSync and AWS Amplify. And then most recently, I joined Temporal as head of developer experience, and Temporal is an entirely back-end distributed system framework that I'm having a lot of fun digging into. The entire time I've been sort of practicing this principle that I call learning in public, which has been a huge help to my career. My last 3 jobs have been entirely originated or established through blog posts or tweets of mine or talks that I've done out in public. And I strongly believe in basically writing down your ideas and your advice as you go along, because you don't want to wait till you've made it like 30 years from now, because there's a lot of narrative bias in that. I much rather engage with people as I grow, and I think that we can all have a positive outlook on our careers.
Yeah, and Shawn, the other thing I would add to it too is you're very well known for the Coding Career Handbook, to kind of dovetail onto that as well. And so there is, as Brian mentioned, there's so many options out there, and not just, the path you took, but tell us a little bit about, expand on that, but then also expand on what are some of the options that are out there. If somebody is asking you, how do you frame these conversations on where to even get started?
In your tech career?
Yes.
Is that what you're going for? Okay, so
yes.
Yeah, I generally tell people to just, go through the standard learning paths. Like, mostly for me, the Coding Career Handbook, which, by the way, originally it was supposed to be called Cracking the Coding Career after Cracking the Coding Interview, which kind of emphasizes the extreme emphasis in terms of the book industry on the interview. But once you get the job, nobody tells you what to do after you get the job, right? And that's actually the hard part. You have to learn to work with others and position yourself for long-term career growth. So that's the thing I wanted to tackle, and specifically the unmet need that I thought I perceived in the market was that everyone was joining and learning to code, and there are a lot of boot camps and advice in colleges and whatever out there for you to help to learn to code. And probably you can get your first job that way. But most companies want to hire seniors. So who's out there training the juniors and getting them into seniors? And so I really wanted to specifically target that audience, because I had made that transition kind of recently myself. And so I wanted to write down advice from myself and 1,500 other resources that I had accumulated along the way. So basically, it's the missing manual to your coding career. So where should you start? I guess, a resource like mine or some other collection of advice from other people, because I think it's really important that you understand that a lot of workplaces, you get assigned a buddy, you get assigned a mentor somewhere, you're kind of rolling the dice on whether or not they're a good one. And so the best way to optimize your chances early on is to really just do a broad search and look for advice and mentors that you resonate with. And sometimes that involves going out there on online and looking for, talks or books like mine to get started.
Yeah. Do you find, a lot of times, maybe not specifically in the coder community, but there'll be these assessment things that people do. So whether it's, like a Myers-Briggs or something else where, it comes back and it kind of says, hey, for the kind of things that you seem to have in your personality, and your personality could be introvert or extrovert. It could be, type A. It could be you're more creative. You're more analytical. Have you found, in talking to people and kind of going through job hunts yourself or talking to, all these people in the community, like that there's certain personality traits or things that might lend you to be more of a front-end developer versus a back-end? Or, do you find people are like, look, I just want to make the most money, so whatever that means, I'm willing to learn that? Like how have you sort of found some of that shakes out over time?
Oh, this is fascinating. So the first response I want to give is that I don't actually have a very good opinion of a lot of the personality tests out there. So for example, MBTI is very volatile, right? Score 1 point the wrong way and you're suddenly a totally different category, which is why a lot of psychologists now prefer the big 5 tests, also called the ocean tests. But if you look at Shopify, for example, they tend to prioritize a different kind of personality test called the Enneagram. All of this is essentially astrology for nerds. Like, I don't actually believe that you can categorize the vast diversity of humanity into 4 neat categories or 16 or 13. I don't care what the number is. That's just small because it fits in your typology of things, but it actually doesn't really describe in specific situations what you should be doing with your life. That's it. I can give some thoughts, but I'm definitely not an expert because I'm biased by the people that I've met and I've seen. And I, quite honestly, a lot of people can make money and be successful in a lot of different ways. And that's the joy of life, that there's no one archetype or stereotype that just does that thing. I will say that I think there are more sort of product-minded or user-minded developers who probably will gravitate more towards the front end, and then there are more sort of machine or logic or detail-oriented people who might graduate more towards the back end. So I have this concept in my book called the Coding Career Layers, where I try to map all the software jobs in the world, going from machine all the way to end user. How do you sort of stack rank them between infrastructure devs to platform devs to people who work on languages to people who work on embedded systems to people who even code as no code or low code developers? And I think if you have an overall organizing principle of here's where I am in the stack, and this is a sweet spot for me because this is the part I care most about, then you're probably more likely to have success in your career. And I definitely believe that you can be a millionaire in all layers of the stack. You may need to interview differently, or you may need to learn differently based on the part of the stack that you're targeting. But I have a very expansive view of what the software career can be, because I personally have moved around so much.
Shawn, I can completely see that. Go ahead.
You and I can totally relate to that. We've been all over the place. So it's good. It's good to hear. It's not just sort of more from the infrastructure. It's all over the place. That's great.
And Shawn,
I will say one thing.
Go ahead.
I'll just throw this in there for a bit of controversy because people need good audio, right? You don't need to agree all the time. So there's the thesis I've been working on called the front end ceiling, which is that front end developers, 9 out of 10 of VPs of Eng or CTOs are back end developers. So there's a permeable ceiling, but there is a statistical ceiling that front end developers just never get to VP of Eng for whatever reason. We should talk about it, because this affects your career choice. If you aspire to some kind of tech leadership, if you aspire to be CTO, yes, you can make it, but statistically, you have a really, really, really poor shot compared to the backend devs.
Yeah, I think the only I don't want to get us too far off topic but I think the flip side to that though is, you look at some of the companies out there they're doing really well, that were sort of product-led founders. So Airbnb is sort of famous for that now. Snapchat, a few of the others, like their folks are very famously product-centric, right? So I think you're right. Like at some point you may completely hit a stage from a technical career, but you may also realize that like if you're very product-driven, maybe as someone with front-end experience, like your jump may not just be to stay purely in the technical track. It might be to go, hey,
Correct.
The product is the thing our customers deal with. Maybe I should be, in product management and leadership and whatever. So it's a good conversation to have.
And Shawn, the other thing we've used on the show in the past too is this concept too of you have to funnel up, and it kind of adds on to your point of like, okay, if you're funneling up in a role, there's less and less opportunities, and statistically, what is the career path to get you to those? So that's fascinating. But I'll also say, the kind of the previous, when Brian and I were both kind of chuckling about, the many career paths and focal points, if you will, like at some point, I think developers, like any engineers, and like Brian and I both in our careers, you just kind of get bored. Working on the same things, and so you want to go do something different. And sometimes it's not necessarily up. Sometimes it's lateral and sideways as well. And so like right now, it seems like we're in, I don't know, some big changes. And what should folks think about as they transition either up or sideways?
Oh, wow. That's a perfectly executed segue, by the way. I saw that.
Oh, thank you.
I saw like next topic, and then you kind of executed that. Okay, so I thought you were talking about industry changes, but it seems like you're really interested in sort of what people can do to prep their careers for career change, and that's something I have some personal experience with. Honestly, like I always think about things in terms of the concept of anti-fragility, if you've come across it from Nicholas Nassim Taleb. Because if you base your entire identity or brand on one technology or one language or one part of the stack, then you're very inflexible. I mean, you may be an expert in that thing, but you kind of lose credibility, or you take a few steps back when you need to change, or when you feel, you get bored, you want to broaden out. So honestly, like the most anti-fragile position to be in is to have the ability, is to just have demonstrable ability that you just learn things very well. And that's a very vague thing to prove. You can't really prove that in an interview, but you can kind of prove that through a track record of being able to pick up a bunch of things and being able to explain it from first principles, being able to run up the learning curve very quickly, for example, by building mini clones of it or whatever, right? However the ways that you learn of that. I just think about skills in terms of, is this skill fragile or anti-fragile?
Yeah, that's fair.
What about? And I think that's fair. I think a lot of us think about that, at least, especially as sometimes you get a little older in your career. You're kind of going, okay, I've been through some of those changes. I've done this a couple of times. You start figuring out where you have experience. I think that makes a lot of sense. What about on the side of, obviously you've been involved with, you mentioned at the beginning, you've been involved with Netlify and AWS and now Temporal and a lot of places where you've seen sort of both sides of the technology. Where are you seeing some of the trends, especially from where developers are sort of showing new interest or, some problem spaces where you're like, okay, this is sort of shift in the industry. Where are some of on the technology side, maybe less the career side, that you're seeing things being interesting for developers or changing for developers?
Gotcha. Yeah, I was thinking about this because, this is like kind of the start of the year Outlook podcast episode.
Yeah.
So I had 5 topics that I've laid out here, and we can kind of go into as much or as little detail as you want.
Sure.
So it's cloud distros, self-provisioning runtimes, workflow engines, monorepos, and then video and developer relations. There's no particular order. I just like, these are the first 5 I thought of.
Yeah. What do you mean by cloud repos?
So cloud distros. Yeah. So that was actually the first I was going to go start talking about. So I worked at Netlify, right, which is a cloud hosting company that coined the Jamstack, and it's been very successful. It went from, I think when I joined, it was like 200,000 developers to now it's over 2 million developers, which is ridiculous considering the time frame that we joined them at. And now they're a unicorn, which again, I also never thought I would see the day they became a unicorn. But they essentially resell AWS services, right? They're a layer on top of AWS. Why can't AWS just destroy them? And I was just noticing, like, there's all these people building second layer clouds is the other term for it. I prefer cloud distros because the term second layer clouds implies the existence of the third and fourth layer, and where does it end? But really, this is just a custom distribution of AWS for a specific audience. And for Nullify, it is a custom distribution of AWS for front-end developers, right? That we do all the DevOps for you so that you don't have to think about it. You just commit to Git and we do the rest. And I think that's a very tight abstraction that has quite honestly become $1 billion idea, which I think it's amazing. And so this idea of cloud distros and people building other distributions for other purposes, like I always talk about Fly.io for edge computing. I always talk about Cloudflare as a sort of serverless edge native cloud distro as well. And then also render.com and other clouds kind of building on top of it, of sort of the baseline clouds. I think this is an interesting phenomenon and probably the cutting edge of innovation if you are into anything DevOps or anything where you want to solve that deployment problem for people.
Yeah, I think we've hit on that before. I hadn't thought about it in the context of cloud distros, but you're right. They basically are going after the part of the market that AWS has never really tried to do, which is, they've allowed people to build up on top of them obviously before, but now we're seeing this sort of, other people are defining the developer experience on top of, this place that Amazon probably years ago thought, look, well, we'll also define that as well as doing the infrastructure. So yeah, I think that's a really fascinating space to sort of see where it evolves, and it does have really interesting long-term implications of, how much does that commoditize what's underneath it, and if you never kind of wrap your head around, what the actual end user experience is, how vulnerable do you make yourself? So yeah, it's probably a topic we should dig into more and more going forward.
I actually, I mentioned Cloudflare in there, but actually that's the one new sort of layer one cloud that I should not name as a cloud distro, because they are building their own cloud, right, with every single point of presence. And I had one of my most successful blog posts of last year was how Cloudflare is playing Go while AWS is playing chess, and people really liked that analogy. I had senior management in Cloudflare telling me, like, yep, that's this is exactly on point.
Yeah, nice. And they're doing it. GitHub's doing it as well. And I don't know where you'd put GitHub in are they their own cloud? Are they kind of tier 1, tier 2? But they're kind of following a similar model too.
Right. Aaron, were you going to say something?
Tell us a little bit more too. I really like that. I want to deep dive into this one too. The idea of the workflow engines as well. In kind of the 5 categories there. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by workflow engines, please.
Yeah. So I never knew of this category, but I definitely felt the pain every single time that you needed to do long running work. And it's not just sort of video processing. It could be like building like a CI/CD system. It could be doing something like a long-running trip. For example, one of my favorite examples is the Amazon one-click purchase, right? That you want to turn like a synchronous operation, like adding things to cart and then going to the cart and then doing a full checkout into a one-click buy with a timeout, right? So you actually have to store something in store the state of the purchase in a queue, and then if a user decides to cancel their one-click buy, then you let them cancel it. If not, the timer has to be set to push it forward. Turning synchronous things into asynchronous actually permeates a lot of things that we do when we code for the real world in sort of business logic. And there's it led me down this path of like, okay, what do we not do well in serverless? And this is what I was exploring at AWS. Like I was essentially at Nullify in AWS. I was a advocate for the serverless ecosystem in the future of serverless. What serverless is really horrible at is long running jobs. Like at the moment you need to last longer than, quite honestly, a few seconds, you're in a whole different category of applications, and that's the category, and that's the domain of workflow engines. And I'm really seeing that rising in popularity. That's why I personally left AWS and left a lot of money on the table at AWS to join Temporo as a startup, because I think that this is a growing category, and it, so far in 2021, it has played out that way. I think so. First of all, you want to call, like, the number of APIs that you call is always increasing. Like, the vendors that you're signing up for, because they all are specialists in their own situations. But every single time you call an API, the likelihood of failure from whatever thing, like network failures or outages from them, or outages from your side, whatever, the probability of failure just exponentially multiplies. So you need a reliability system. You need timeouts, and you need retries, and you need to just standardize it across the entire stack. Then you need to orchestrate your microservices internally with the systems that you own, and you need to have really good tooling for observability across all of these systems, and you need to have like a recovery strategy if any part of your system goes down. And then finally, like, what I'm really excited about, workflow engines also help you basically have durable asynchronous programming. Like, imagine if I could implement a monthly billing subscription with just an infinite loop. Like, I'll say while true, and I'll just charge an account and then sleep for 30 days. And why can I sleep for 30 days is because that timer is just set durably inside of my programming environment. And I just when I saw something like that in a workflow engine like Temporo, there are others, by the way, that there's a long history of workflow engines out there, but Temporo is the one that does it as code, in idiomatic code that I, as a developer, can really interpret and use all my familiar tooling to write software with. That really clicked for me, and I think it's clicking for a lot of people as well.
Interesting. I want to hit on one last, and you put a number of topics in there. We're going to leave those in the show notes. People will be able to click in and dive in some more. There's one more that you put in here, though, which is using video for developer relations, and I feel like there's kind of a bigger story to that, because, like, when I look, for example, at the way my kids learn, forget about the fact that the last year and a half they were home and using video conferencing for learning, but I mean, so much of what they do is they go out and they try and find experts. It could be on YouTube or TikTok or to wherever. But they use it as much for communication as it does for learning. Like, what are you finding in developer relations where video is it a better medium to try and explain things? Do you find there's a different way people engage? Kind of give us some thoughts around why you put video for DevRel in there, because I think there's a lot to unpack there.
I'm obsessed by it. How much time do you spend on YouTube a day? For me, it's like between 1 to 2 hours a day, and I'm a fairly high hard to reach audience. And I think it's maybe a generational thing, because I have heard feedback that people of a different generation don't like video as much. They rather read the docs, and that's fine. But I think it's just a huge white space, and there's a lot of ways you can get creative about video, and it's not about being the whole influencer with like clickbait thumbnails and stuff like that, but just efficiently conveying information at extremely high bandwidth. Like like right now, when I debug, I'll use this service called replay.io, which actually is kind of like Loom, but it also captures the whole stack of the call stack that I'm working on, and it sends it over to whoever I'm trying to debug with, and they can play back the video to reproduce the error that I saw, right? So I don't have to type out a whole essay just to show people like, no, I'm not crazy, like this actually happened in your software, and here's proof. Video proof is just so useful in so many things, like whether it's like teaching or just entertaining or whatever it is. And I think DevRel, in sort of the DevRel space, when people talk about DevRel, they're talking about a model that's kind of outdated, like the same way that we did DevRel 10 years ago, like doing blog posts and flying to conferences and doing talks. No one's really innovated on that yet. And I think people who are pushing the boundaries on that are really getting an edge, because they get a lot of mindshare in the new sort of native formats of current sort of content creation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it is something that, like you said, that it fills a space. There's a certain way of learning that goes with it. It is probably a lot more work, but it is another one of those spaces. I think you find that once you dive into it a little bit, you're like, oh, that tool is really good for that, and that tool is really good for that. And I mean, there are some workflows and tool chains that you may have to pull together, but when you see people that do it really well, you're just like, oh, like it just, a light bulb just goes on. You're like, that made it so much easier for me, and it's cool to see. It's cool to see, like you use the debugging example. I've got a tool I use for some of the sports stuff I do with folks. That's like, it's essentially the same thing. Video's built into the debugging process, and you can kind of marry the numbers with the video. And so yeah, I totally agree there.
I have a fun fact that I saw from somewhere, but I can't really vouch for its truthiness. But apparently TikTok just overtook Google as the most visited website.
I heard that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Very, very addictive algorithm.
Video. I'm telling you, like short form, long form, any form, people are not using it enough in business. And the future is just, more, there's this whole trend of consumerization of enterprise, right? Like you want to bring out the trends that you see in your personal life into the workplace. And for sure, people are consuming media in a totally different way than we did 10 years ago. And we should adapt our practices in DevRel to conform to that. So the link that I put in here is from someone who's actually using Temporal, but she's actually working on this thesis. Milk Video is an idea of, how can we sort of automate video creation for developer relations and other marketing functions.
Shawn, that's awesome. And one last comment on TikTok, and then I'll move on to the next topic. So my oldest daughter, she loves to cook and bake and do all things like that. And with the Christmas holiday here recently, she decided she was going to make an apple pie. And how did she do it? She went out to TikTok and got a recipe off of TikTok and made an apple pie off of a 1 or 2 minute video on TikTok. And oh, by the way, it was a fantastic apple pie. And so yeah, absolutely, I could completely see that. And so Shawn, if I'm going to change topics here and flip back to careers for a little bit.
Yeah.
For the developers out there, sometimes getting ahead is a little bit about getting visibility into the projects, right? And sometimes there's there's personal projects at work, there's side projects, there's, maybe public projects that may or may not be part of the day job. How have you personally, and how do you recommend others kind of find the right balance between all of them? Do you have any advice to give there?
So public, this is just about like, how much do you spend on your day job versus the side project?
Yeah, pretty much.
or even like we hear, you'll see announcements that come out. Oh, Walmart has open sourced this thing, or Capital One has like. It doesn't always have to just be like, hey, I'm doing my side project and I hope my boss doesn't find out. But like even like in people's day jobs, have you found, does it have to be the big press release where your company who's not known for doing open sources something, or like is it just like being like the constant person in a meetup? Like, have you found any way that people aren't just like, I'm a really good coder, but nobody knows what I'm doing, and so how do I get visible, kind of thing?
Okay, I feel like this is a bundled concept, so let me try to untangle it a little bit. So first of all, let me try to answer the hard question, which is how much time to spend on the day job versus the side project.
Sure.
I have two stories to relate. The first is that Temporal is actually an open source project from Uber. It's probably one of Uber's most successful open source project alumni. And basically, I think at work you look for hard problems at the place that you work at, and you build the system so that it could be open sourced. And it may not ever be open source just because of your company's legal situation or your internal infrastructure or whatever. But the fact that you're organizing it for open source means you automatically adopt a lot of best practices, like have good documentation, have a really good CI/CD, because anyone could just throw in a PR at some point, and you need to be able to do code reviews really well. Open source just forces a lot of good engineering best practices on you, and so if you work as though you were about to open source it at any point in time, I think that's a very good way to set it up. And I think more and more companies are embracing the fact that us having a very prominent or visible open source project actually is good for the company, good for the engineering, good for hiring. So let's go ahead and do that. So I mean, try to work it into your day job as much as possible. Obviously, I also am a fan of jobs that let you learn in public, and I think that's as much of a cultural thing as it is a job description thing, because some cultures just don't are not very welcoming of that, and you should sort of weigh that impact on your life, career potential, earning potential accordingly. The second story I want to relate is actually about an interview that I had with Anurag Goel, who's the CEO of Render.com. He was employee number 8 at Stripe. So like as pretty much as early as possible as you could possibly get on at Stripe, right? Like, and that is going to get you a lot of equity at such a valuable company. How do you be employee number 8 at Stripe? He worked on a side project that needed Stripe. And he looked around and he saw it early and he realized the need for it because he was about to be a user. And then he went for it and started talking to Patrick and John and started making contributions and feature suggestions until they just gave it an offer. And I think having a keen eye for those projects, I think is really helpful. What the rule of thumb that I have heard from people is basically like a 5-to-1 ratio of work at day job versus work on side projects. And that can be spread out between like an intraday thing, like basically spend 1 to 2 hours a day, or if you want to bunch it up, spending essentially Saturdays on the thing. A lot of people, they find the different ways to work it in, but I think that's the typical cadence that people do that sort of work in. And I think it's very beneficial if your personal family situation can accommodate it. So that's the hard problem, right? That's the the proportionment of time, which is always a difficult and challenging issue. The easy one is the marketing, because that's my job. And that's very much a function of, to me, the way that you get a cold start problem, because I have a blog post about this called how to market yourself without being a celebrity, because I think that's the main thing that people see as the hurdle for themselves. They look at the people out there who have projects that they're like, it's not that great, I could do better, right? But they're only getting attention for it because they're already a celebrity, and that's the excuse that you make for yourself, because you're like, you don't know how to get an audience for your work. I think the way to solve that cold start problem is to target hyper specifically to specific people that would benefit from your work, right? Whatever it is, your open source library, your blog post, your talk, whatever. You send it to that person that you had in mind, and you say, like, this is, I made this with you in mind. You said this specific thing in the past, and here's how I have addressed it. In other words, do things that don't scale until it starts scaling, right? Have conversations instead of trying to stand up on your soapbox and shout to an empty room. That's never going to work. Seek people out individually until they start to recognize and trust you and start to spread your work for you. And I think that's a very nice way to get at least the initial visibility going.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I think that whole idea. Well, I think it boils down to the basic thing of like, it's very easy to sort of, like you said, jump on a soapbox and talk about whatever. At the end of the day, people are like, okay, are you going to do that for me, or are you just telling me I should go do it because I don't have a 25th or a 28th or a 30th hour in the day? So, no, I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant.
The way I put it is the topic that most people are interested in is themselves. Like, what's in it for me, right? If you can answer that compellingly and grab attention for it, then you're golden. If it's all about you and what you think and how you're greater than everyone else, I don't care.
Right. It's the difference. I mean, it's always they say that's always the best. It's always the best topic on a first date. Is, get the other person talking about themselves. But it's also the best way to get through meetings with clients. It's always the best way to meet new people. It's like, if they're just sitting there listening to you, as opposed to going, I'm showing interest in what you have a problem space or interest in. It's way easier to make that connection.
So I've go ahead. I have a community for my book, and in the community we actually have an acronym for this. It's called PUWPD, PUWTPD, and it's pick up what they put down. And that's the name of the essay that spawned this perspective. Basically, because I saw so many people, they're very inspired by learning in public. They're very inspired by side projects. They work so hard on it, they put it out there, and then it falls flat. And then they stop, they give up because they're like, I tried it, it failed. And I'm like, of course it failed, because you didn't build it with a specific person in mind. So yeah, pick up what the people put down.
Yeah. No, I like that. I used to, so sort of side story. We used to, like, one of the companies I worked for, we used to sponsor the media lab at MIT. And one of the things they would do, which is a really cool project, except that at the end of it, you would go, anyways, it's a long story, but you would go and they would have this sort of like big display week, and you would show up and they would be like these, brilliant PhD students or, MIT mathematicians or whatever. And they would go, here, I built this thing. And then you'd sort of look at the thing and you'd be like, but what does it do? And it was always this thing of like, but what does it do? But it was exactly your point. Like, so many of them were so great at building something that, probably went on to do amazing stuff. But like getting over that first one-to-one person thing of like, but what does it do for me? Or why would I ever use it? Why would I care? I think is that it's sort of the equivalent of like getting the first dollar of revenue for your business or making the first profitable dollar. Like, if you can't get over that first hurdle, it makes everything else really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
Aaron, we've been going for a while. I want to ask Shawn one last question, because I don't want to take up all of his time. Any tips or tricks? So obviously, a lot of what we're talking about today makes this assumption that you're curious about things, you're willing to learn things, you want to put in the time. Any tips or tricks that shortcut that a little bit, or things that have accelerated your learning process that maybe aren't a complete shortcut, but just you found over and over again you kind of go back to make things easier for you to learn, or willing to learn? Yeah.
So the standard answer that I'm going to give you a new answer today, because the standard answer I usually give for this kind of question is that you should learn in public, right? And that's the essay that I'm best known for. Millions of developers have read it. So you can go to swix.io/LIP and check that out. And I think that basically it's the principle of having a feedback loop that accelerates your learning and builds your network at the same time. But the other insight that I've been having, and I haven't written anywhere about this, so this is the first time I'm articulating it, is that you should have skin in the game, right? Because if you're learning just in case, you're like, oh, it'll be nice to learn something. You're not going to stick with it because you don't care enough. But if your life depended on it, if your family member was like being held at gunpoint and like, and you had to learn the thing, you would learn the thing. So how can you figure out how to get skin in the game? Whether it's like through some commitment device of like, by a certain date, I'm going to have be able to do a specific skill, or you commit to a system, right? Every single day, I'm going to spend 1 or 2 hours doing this. I like a nice mix of systems and goals for learning, but having that commitment device and skin in the game actually focuses your attention and forces you to learn. Because otherwise, you're gonna just veg out in front of the TV or something.
Yeah, no, Aaron, I think somewhere in there he's tapped into our desire to rebuild the website. Just it's been
fair enough.
Been our 10-year project.
Yeah, exactly. Someday we're gonna get a new website.
Shawn, this has been great. Like we mentioned at the top of the show, like we could probably go in 10 different directions and dive into stuff. Sometimes part of these shows are just introducing people to really interesting people like yourself who have a lot of experience, a lot of space in this. So I hope folks got a lot out of this show, but more importantly, we're going to put a bunch of things in the show notes to dive into a lot of the work that you've been doing in different domains of this. So thank you so much for the time. If anybody's interested in kind of learning about all the things that you're doing, just give us a couple plugs for some of the places they can go and find good information.
Oh, yeah, sure. You can find me on my website at swix.io, where I have all my essays and my little about with more links. Or you can find me on Twitter at Swix.
Excellent. We'll put all the stuff for learning in public and coding community and all those in there as well. Aaron, we're off to a good start for these first couple of year aheads. I think we're gonna have to keep raising the bar on them. Do you want to wrap it up and take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. And Shawn, thank you so much for your time. Really fascinating topics. And I urge everyone too to go take a look at the show notes. We will have all the links in there as well. The sites Shawn just mentioned, as well as some of the topics and links to those. So go check that out. But as Brian mentioned, we've got these kind of look ahead shows going, and we're right in the middle of it right now. And we certainly urge you to continue to listen in as well. And if you enjoy the show, please go ahead and give us a favorable rating wherever you get your podcast, and tell a friend as well. And so on behalf of Brian and myself, thank you everyone for listening this week, and we'll talk to y'all next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.